On a hot, sunny Saturday morning, three young women wearing bathing suits left their belongings on a packed Lake Michigan beach and climbed aboard a motorboat. That was the last anyone ever saw of them. As panic grew, theories swirled. A secret medical procedure gone wrong, entanglement with organized crime. Decades later, the lake remains calm, but the silence surrounding that day is anything but. Welcome to Without a Trace. I'm your host, Jalyn. Every file holds a mystery. Every story deserves to be heard. This is the story of Ann Miller, Patricia Blau, and Renee Bruhl. On the morning of July 2nd, 1966, 21-year-old Ann drove her four-door Buick to pick up 19-year-old Patricia from her family's home in Westchester, Illinois around 8 a.m. Patricia told her mother that the girls planned to return home early in the evening since their friend, 19-year-old Renee, was coming with them and she needed to be back in time to make dinner for her husband. Ann and Patricia picked up Renee from her home on West Fulton on Chicago's west side, then stopped at a drugstore to pick up some suntan lotion. The women arrived at the Indiana Dunes State Park at approximately 10 a.m. Ann parked her car in the parking lot, and the woman hiked up to a spot that was about 100 yards from the Lake Michigan shoreline. They set up their belongings next to a couple's beach towel. The couple reported seeing the women leave their belongings on the beach at approximately noon and enter the lake together. The witnesses saw them speaking to an unidentified man operating a 14 or 16-foot long white boat. They watched as the motorboat glided away with the girls on it. The couple then waited all day for the women to return. They didn't know the girls, but thought it was odd that they would leave their purses unattended on a day when the park was packed with more than 9,000 sunbathers and swimmers. Eventually, the couple gave up and left at dusk. While leaving, they pointed out the abandoned belongings to a park ranger, explaining that the young woman had left on a boat that was operated by a young man with a head full of dark, curly hair. The ranger bundled up the belongings and stored them away. Renee left a large beach towel, her shorts, blouse, cigarettes, suntan lotion, 25 cents, and her purse, which contained about $55 in uncashed checks. Ann left her denim shorts, a polo shirt, shoes, a white bathing cap, a comb, and her bottle on the beach. Patricia also left her clothing and purse on the beach. On July 4th, the park superintendent took a call from a Chicago man inquiring about his daughter, Patricia. She had not been heard from since leaving her home for Indiana Dunes with Ann and Renee. The superintendent opened the belongings that had been left on the beach and found Patricia's wallet, keys, and clothing. He also found clothes and purses belonging to Renee and Ann. Bill assured Harold Blau that his daughter would turn up and thought she probably just had a little too much fun over the weekend. The park rangers soon learned that missing persons reports had been filed for all three women over the weekend in Illinois by their families. The rangers searched the park, and it was discovered that Ann's Buick was still sitting in the beach parking lot. Her car keys had been left with her purse on the beach, but other items of clothing and personal effects were still inside the car. The car was still parked in its original spot from July 2nd. No one had moved it. The park rangers soon got other law enforcement agencies involved, including the U.S. Coast Guard. The search was in full swing by July 5th. 3 days after the girls had vanished. The belated investigation consisted of scuba divers scouring the lake while searchers on foot and horseback combed the sands and woods of the park, which stretches along 45 miles of the Indiana coastline. The search extended a 6-mile stretch of the beach west of the state park. No sign of the young women were found. As the investigation ramped up, other witnesses who were in the park that day came forward with conflicting stories, but authorities came to believe the first witnesses' reports were the most reliable. More witnesses came forward that substantiated the initial report that the women got into a boat with an unidentified man. A beachgoer who was taking home videos on July 2nd offered his films to investigators. The search was narrowed down to 2 boats after the detectives watched the footage. One of them was a 16-foot runabout with a 3-hull design, which was operated by a man who fit the description of the man seen with the girls. 3 women who matched descriptions of the missing girls were seen aboard the boat in the footage. The second boat was identified as a 26-foot cabin cruiser with 3 men and 3 women aboard. The cabin cruiser was seen around 3 p.m., 3 hours after the women got aboard the smaller boat. Then, reports started coming in that Anne, Patricia, and Renee were seen walking on the beach and eating after this time. Investigators came to believe that they had been dropped off on the beach west of the state park by the driver of the smaller boat. Then, the driver drove back to retrieve his 2 male friends and the cabin cruiser. While on the second beach, the girls were reportedly approached by another unidentified man who accompanied them to the cabin cruiser. Witnesses stated that this second boat was equipped with a radio antenna, but apparently did not have a name painted on its stern. The final sighting has never been confirmed, but authorities did consider it reliable. A psychic claimed to have a vision of a Lake Michigan cabin where the women's bodies were buried. An extensive search of the property believed to be the place seen by the psychic did not uncover any evidence. However, detectives did point out that the shifting sand dunes may have buried any possible evidence deeply under the ground. Investigators began looking into the backgrounds of the 3 women in an attempt to discover if their disappearances could have been voluntary, and it was there that things got even murkier and strange. In Renee's purse, authorities found a letter addressed to her husband, Jeff. The couple had been married for just 15 months in July 1966, but in the letter, she asked for a divorce. She said that she felt her husband spent too much time working on hot rods with his friends and did not seem to have time for her. Her husband, though, told the police that he was not aware of any problems in their marriage at the time of his wife's disappearance. Her family agreed with the statement, telling investigators that they believed Renee had written the note in a moment of anger and never gave it to Jeff because she changed her mind about the divorce. All 3 women were friends, drawn together by their love of horses. Patricia and Anne met while boarding their horses at the same Illinois stable. Renee was a classmate of Patricia's at her high school in Maywood, Illinois. The women often rode together and often met at a tavern in Hodgkins, Illinois, after their outings. According to a theory created by Dick Wiley, a reporter and photographer who chased crime in Northwest Indiana for the Gary Post-Tribune and the Chicago Sun-Times during the 1950s and 60s, the events leading to their disappearance began there. Both Patricia and Anne were single, and Dick Wiley believes that they fell for married men they met at the tavern and both got pregnant. Later statements from some of Anne's friends claimed that she was 3 months pregnant and had spoken about going to a home for unwed mothers prior to her disappearance. Abortion was illegal in Illinois at the time. However, some women who found themselves in trouble visited a house just across the state border in Gary, Indiana, where a husband and wife, Frank and Helen Largo, performed backroom abortions. Ralph Largo Jr. lived in Gary, Indiana with his aunt and uncle, Helen and Frank. He was seen visiting the beach on July 2nd and resembled the boat driver the women were seen speaking to shortly before they disappeared. Dick Wiley theorized that the girls went with Ralph to a larger boat several miles offshore to get abortions, but something went wrong and the women were killed and dumped into the lake. This theory has not been confirmed. Another theory involves the Tricolor Stables in Illinois, where the 3 women frequently rode horses at. The stables were owned by George Jane, a prominent horse dealer. George's brother Silas Jane owned the horse stables Idle Hour Stables. George and Silas's phone numbers were discovered in the belongings of one of the missing women in 1966. Silas had a reputation of violence and was heavily involved in criminal activity, including fraud, imitation, arson, and murder. He sold virtually worthless horses to wealthy men with daughters in their early teenage years, claiming that the horses were of the top quality needed if the daughters were to become champion riders. Parents allowed their daughters to spend extended periods of time at his stables unchaperoned. Silas boasted to his associates of having molested many of these underage girls. When fathers complained about the poor quality of horses they had bought from him, he would tell them that their daughters had become notorious among his employees for their promiscuity. Though the accusation may have been groundless, scandal-wary fathers rarely pressed the point. Silas was also involved in the Peterson-Schessler murders in 1955. On October 18, 1955, 3 young boys, John Schessler, age 13, his brother Anton Jr., age 11, and their friend Robert Peterson, age 14, were found naked in a ditch in the Robinson Woods Forest Preserve on the northwest side of Chicago. Authorities were told by informants that Silas's former employee, Kenneth Hansen, had boasted of committing the murders at the Idle Hour Stables. A second informant had also told the FBI of Kenneth's boasts. It emerged that Kenneth, who was 22 years old at the time, had met the boys while they were hitchhiking. Kenneth lured them into the stables under the pretext of showing them horses. When Robert discovered that Kenneth had been sexually abusing the brothers, Kenneth attacked all 3 and killed them. Silas had been enraged at Kenneth when he discovered what he had done. However, realizing the murders were on his property and had the potential to ruin him, Silas concealed the crime. The barn in which the murders allegedly occurred burned down on May 15, 1956, in suspected arson. In the mid-1960s, George and his brother Silas were involved in a bitter argument over horse stealing. On July 14, 1965, George asked his 22-year-old employee, Cheryl Rude, to move his Cadillac. When she turned the ignition key, a bomb composed of 3 sticks of dynamite exploded, killing her. George believed that he was the intended target of the bomb and that Silas was responsible for planting it. Sheriff's investigators agreed with this assessment. On July 14th, Chicago police found bomb-making equipment in the home of Haladine Clemenson, who told them that James Blotier had asked him how to wire a car bomb. Bomb-making equipment was also found in James's home, and handwriting experts tied him to a receipt for explosives. James, who was a handyman at Silas's stables, told investigators he had heard Silas offer Eddie Moran $10,000 to bomb George's car. A white Buick had been seen at George's tricolor stables shortly before the bombing. Knowing that James did repair work at his friend Thomas Hanna's used car dealership, authorities questioned Thomas, who said he did not have a white Buick on his lot. In 1967, the evidence implicating James in Cheryl's murder, including the receipt signed by James, was destroyed by the Chicago police. The case went cold for nearly 30 years until authorities re-questioned Thomas Hanna, and he told them that James had borrowed a white 1960 Buick LeSabre from his lot on the day of the murder. When James returned the car, he was visibly upset and kept repeating, "I killed the wrong person." Investigators have explored that the possibility that Anne, Patricia, and/or Renee may have witnessed the bomb being planted 1 year prior to the disappearances. This theory may explain Patricia's odd remarks about a facial injury she received in March of 1966 and the connection to syndicate people. Silas Jane reportedly told a sheriff that he had 3 bodies buried underneath his residence sometime after the woman's 1966 disappearances. Law enforcement took the comment seriously and planned to search Silas's property. The sheriff involved was killed in a farming accident before the search took place. As a result, the lead was left cold. None of the men have been proven to have been involved with Ann Miller, Patricia Blau, and Renee Brohl's disappearances, but it does lead to speculation that something may have occurred to cause the three women to vanish. Thank you for listening to Without a Trace with your host, Jolene. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive into the disappearances of Ann Miller, Patricia Blau, and Renee Brohl. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and follow Without a Trace on social media. Join me next week as I dive into another case.